You know what scared me the most that day? It wasn't the moment he fell. It was the silence right before. I'm going to tell you something I saw in London in the summer of 2019, and even now, 7 years later, I still think about it when I can't sleep. People online keep arguing about what really happened that afternoon outside Wellington Barracks. Some say it was staged. Some say the guard was hiding something. A few say it was the strangest thing they'd ever filmed on holiday. I was standing maybe 12 feet away from him. I had a paper cup of overpriced coffee in my hand. And I'm telling you, what I saw wasn't normal. Not for a tourist, not for a guardsman, not for anyone. But to understand it, you have to understand the day first. The whole day. Because everything that mattered happened slowly and then all at once. My name is Marcus Beddington. I grew up in a small town outside Sheffield. My father worked the rails his entire life and my mother taught primary school until her knees gave out. I'd come down to London that week because my niece Hattie had turned 12, and her one wish, her single solitary wish, was to see the changing of the guard. Not the London Eye, not Madame Tussauds, the guards. She'd been obsessed since she was 7, when her granddad gave her a little book with red coats and tall black hats on the cover. He passed away the following winter. The book stayed. So there we were. Me, Hattie, and my sister Pauline walking through St. James's Park on a Tuesday morning in late July. The grass smelled like it had been cut the night before. There was that warm London smell in the air, the one that's part exhaust and part flowers, part hot pavement. Tourists were already gathering, even though we were early. Hattie was practically pulling my arm out of its socket. Uncle Marcus, come on, we'll miss it. We won't miss it, love. They don't start for another 40 minutes. What if there's a queue? There's always a queue. That's how London works. Pauline laughed at that. She'd been quiet all morning. She gets quiet sometimes ever since the divorce. But Hattie being happy was making her happy, and that was enough for me. We crossed the bridge over the lake and the pelicans were sitting fat and grumpy on the rocks. A father was pointing them out to his small son, telling him they'd been there since King Charles II. The boy didn't care. He wanted ice cream. Don't they all? By the time we reached the Victoria Memorial, the crowd had thickened. Phones up. Selfie sticks. A woman in a sun hat the size of a satellite dish kept stepping in front of Hattie, and Hattie kept ducking around her trying to see. I lifted her onto a low stone ledge so she could get a better view. She was small for 12. Skinny arms, freckled nose, a Yorkshire Terrier of a girl who barked at everything she loved. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing at his post just inside the gate near the side of the palace. One of the sentries. Bearskin cap, red tunic, the whole picture postcard kit, but something was off. Not obvious. Just off in the way you notice when a friend is faking a smile or a dog stops wagging its tail. He was sweating. I mean, of course they all sweat in those uniforms. It was 28 degrees that day and climbing, but this was different. There was a sheen on his upper lip that caught the light every few seconds, and his chest, under that thick red wool, was rising and falling a fraction too fast. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even particularly observant most days, but I'd done my time as a volunteer firefighter back home before my back gave out, and you learn to read bodies. You learn when something's not right. I leaned over to Pauline. That guard, the one on the left, he doesn't look well. She squinted. They never look well, Marcus, it's the heat. No, this is different. She gave me that look sisters give you. The one that says you're being dramatic and also you're probably right, and she doesn't want to deal with either possibility. He'll be fine, she said. They train for this. Hattie heard us, of course she did. Her ears are tuned to royal frequencies. What's wrong with him? Nothing, sweetheart, just keep watching. I tried to, I really did, but my eyes kept going back. The guard was maybe 22, 23 years old, tall, slim. His chin strap was tight under his jaw and a single bead of sweat was trailing down from his temple, sliding past his ear, disappearing into the high collar of his tunic. He blinked once, slowly, then again slower. There's a thing I learned about the guards a long time ago. Maybe you've heard it. They're not statues, they breathe, they blink. Every 10 minutes or so, the senior man calls them to march a short pattern, just a few paces forward and back, then return to attention. It's not for show, it's to keep the blood moving, to stop them from passing out. Because in those uniforms, in that heat with that posture, your circulation slows to a crawl. Blood pools in your legs. Your brain starts losing oxygen. And if you stand still long enough, your body just gives up. You drop, straight down like a tree. Famous footage of it exists. You've probably seen the clips. A guardsman folds at the knees, his bare skin hits the pavement, the crowd gasps. It's been happening for centuries. There's even a phrase the older soldiers use, passed down through the regiments. They call it going down with honor, meaning you don't try to catch yourself. You don't break formation, you don't reach out. You fall as you stood, rigid, disciplined, proud. But there's another thing the regiments do. Something most tourists never see. Something I didn't even know existed until that day. The guard in front of me, the young one, his eyes started to flutter. Just a little, like he was fighting sleep. His rifle was held tight against his shoulder, the bayonet pointing straight up, catching the sunlight. His knees, I noticed, were locked. That's the worst thing you can do. Locked knees stop the blood entirely. They teach you in any kind of ceremonial service never to lock your knees. You bend them just slightly, almost invisibly, every few seconds. You flex your calves. You shift your weight. Tiny movements no one in the crowd can see. He wasn't doing any of it. I pulled out my phone. I don't know why. Reflex, I suppose. The same reflex that makes everyone film everything now. I felt embarrassed even as I did it, like I was being one of those rubberneckers at a motorway crash. But I also felt something else, something heavier, a feeling that I needed to remember this, even if I didn't know why yet. A man next to me, American by his accent, was already filming. He was narrating quietly to his wife. "Honey, look at this guy. He's gonna go. I'm telling you, he's gonna go." His wife shushed him. The guard's right shoulder dipped, just a centimeter, then corrected. Hattie tugged my sleeve. "Uncle Marcus." "Yeah, love." He looked scared. I looked down at her. She was watching him with the kind of focus only children can manage. Pure, undistracted, unfiltered attention. And she was right. He didn't just look unwell, he looked frightened. Of what I didn't know, maybe of falling, maybe of failing, maybe of something else entirely. That's when I saw the second guard. He was further back near the small wooden box where the sentries stand during bad weather. Older, maybe early 30s, a different posture somehow, more set, more aware. His eyes were forward like they're supposed to be, but I had the strangest feeling they weren't really forward at all. They were on his colleague, watching, reading, counting something. I didn't know it then, but he was timing it. There's an old practice in the household division, one the public hardly ever sees and almost never understands. It doesn't have a formal name in any manual I've ever come across. The men just call it the feint to attention. It's not a movement. It's not a drill you can teach in a parade square. It's something that grows between soldiers who have stood next to each other for years, in the cold and the heat and the rain, watching each other's bodies for the first signs of trouble. When one man begins to lose consciousness, the others know. They can feel it before they see it. The way his breathing changes, the way his shadow shifts on the pavement, the way the leather of his crossbelt creaks just a little differently. And when they know, they prepare, silently, without a word, without breaking their own posture for so much as a heartbeat. The senior man times his next movement, the call to step out or to change position, so that it lands exactly when his comrade is about to go. So that if the falling man drops, he drops into the rhythm of the regiment, not in shame. Or if he holds on, the movement gives him a chance to flex, to breathe, to come back to himself. It looks to the crowd like ceremony. It is, in truth, mercy. Nobody outside the regiment understands it. I didn't that day. I just felt it. The way you feel a storm coming before the first drop hits your windscreen. The young guard's bayonet wavered. A woman in the crowd noticed. She gasped, just softly, the way you do when you almost trip on a curb and catch yourself. A few people turned to look at her, then followed her eyes to him. Phones lifted higher. The American next to me whispered, "Here we go, here we go." I wanted to shout. I wanted to say, "Give him a moment, leave him alone, this isn't entertainment." But my mouth was dry. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. Hattie's small fingers had clamped around my wrist. The young guard's chest hitched. His shoulders pulled back even tighter, as if his body was trying to remember the shape of attention, trying to hold it through pure will. And then the older guard, the one near the sentry box, drew in a single breath. I saw it. His ribs lifted under his red tunic. His chin moved a fraction. And in a voice that was not loud but was the most absolute voice I have ever heard come out of a human being, he barked a single command. I won't pretend I caught the words. They weren't really words to me. They were a sound. A sharp, clean sound that cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade through silk. What happened next is what I came to tell you about. It's what's been replayed in my head 1,000 times. It's what I tried to explain to my mates back home, and they laughed, and they said I was making it up, and I stopped telling it after a while. But it happened. I swear to you on my niece's life, it happened exactly like this. The young guard fell. And he didn't. Both at the same time. I don't know how else to describe it. His knees gave out. I saw them go. There was that horrible moment where you watch a body decide to stop fighting gravity, and his bare skin tilted forward, and his rifle slipped a fraction down his shoulder, and the whole crowd gasped at once. This collective intake of breath, like the whole pavement had been holding it. But he didn't hit the ground. He hit attention. I know how that sounds. I know you're going to read this and think I've embellished it for effect. But there is no other way to say what I saw. As he was falling, as his weight was already going down and forward, the older guard's command snapped through the air, and the young man's body responded the way a body responds when you've trained it for 10,000 hours. His back straightened. His chin came up. His shoulders squared. His rifle locked back into position. And his feet that had been about to crumple beneath him, slammed flat into the pavement with a sound like a single hard hand clap. He was standing. He was standing as if he had always been standing. The fall had become a movement. The collapse had become a drill. And his eyes, his glassy, half-conscious eyes, were forward again, and his chest was rising and falling in long, slow breaths, and the color was already coming back into his face. The crowd didn't applaud. I want to make that clear. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was the kind of moment where you realize you've just witnessed something you don't have the vocabulary for. People just stood there, phones still up, mouths slightly open, the way people stand when a magician does something they can't explain, and they're not sure if they're allowed to be impressed. The American next to me lowered his phone. He said very quietly, "What the hell did I just film?" I didn't answer him. I didn't have an answer. Hattie was still holding my wrist. Her grip had gone slack, but her eyes were huge. "Uncle Marcus," she whispered, "did he fall?" "I don't know, love." "He did, didn't he?" I think he started to. "But he didn't." "No, he didn't." She thought about that for a long moment. Then she said, in the small, serious voice she sometimes uses when she's working something out, "Somebody helped him." I looked at her. Then I looked at the older guard, who was once again as still as a statue, his eyes locked on the horizon, his face revealing absolutely nothing, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just done the most extraordinary thing I'd ever seen one human being do for another. "Yeah, love," I said, "somebody helped him." That was when I realized the story wasn't over. Because the young guard was still in trouble, I could see it. He was upright, yes. He was at attention, yes. But his color was bad again already, and the trembling in his right hand had started, the smallest fluttering motion against the wood of his rifle. He had maybe a minute, maybe two. The feint had been turned, but it had not been beaten. And the changing of the guard was still 15 minutes away. I looked at the older guard. He was looking at his comrade. I didn't see his eyes move. I just knew. The clock on the palace tower ticked on. The pelicans in the lake settled into the reeds. Somewhere behind me, a child was crying about a dropped ice lolly. And the young guardsman, 22 years old in his first summer of full ceremonial duty, was standing on the edge of his own consciousness, held there by a tradition older than any of us in that crowd, a tradition that none of us were ever meant to see. I would learn later just how much further it would go. But that was still to come. For now, in that strange suspended moment, I did the only thing I could think to do. I held my niece's hand a little tighter, and I watched. The next 10 minutes were the longest 10 minutes of my life. I want you to understand something about crowds, about big tourist crowds in particular. They have a mood the same way a room has a temperature, and the mood of that crowd had changed. Before the near faint, it was a sort of distracted hum. People half watching, half scrolling, mostly just there to say they'd been there. After it, the hum was gone. People were properly watching now. Phones were still raised, but the chatter had dropped to whispers. Even the woman with the satellite dish hat had stopped fidgeting. The whole pavement had become, without anyone planning it, an audience. And the young guard knew, I'm sure of that. He couldn't see us, not really. His eyes were forward, glazed and fixed, but he could feel the attention. You always can, it presses on you. It changes the weight of the air on your skin. I noticed his hand again, the small flutter against the rifle stock. I noticed his throat, the way it worked as he swallowed without moving his head. There was a vein at his temple that was pulsing faster than it should have been. And the sweat, God, the sweat. It was running freely now. One drop had reached the corner of his mouth and he couldn't wipe it away. Pauline leaned into me. Marcus, is he all right? I don't think so. Should someone do something? They are doing something, you just can't see it. She gave me that look again, the dramatic and also right look. But this time there was worry in it. Real worry. She put her hand on Hattie's shoulder and pulled her a half step closer. A police officer was standing about 15 feet to the right of the gate. Tall fellow, vest stuffed with kit, sunglasses on despite being in the shade. I'd noticed him earlier without really noticing him, the way you notice a lamp post. But now I saw that he, too, was watching the young guard, and his head was tilted slightly, the way you tilt yours when you're listening to something on your radio earpiece. So they knew. Of course they knew. They have eyes on those sentries all the time from places you'd never spot. Cameras, spotters, other soldiers in plain clothes who blend into the crowd as if they were born there. The whole apparatus around the palace is more layered than tourists realize. You see 2 men in red coats. You don't see the other 20 people whose job is to keep those 2 men and the building behind them safe. But knowing isn't the same as intervening. And intervening in this context is not simple. You can't just walk up to a sentry on duty and ask him if he's all right. There are protocols. There are appearances. There is the very serious business of what the public sees and what the public must never see. The household division is not a show. It is a working military formation that also happens to be the most photographed unit on Earth. And every photograph, every video, every selfie is part of how the institution survives. So the young guard would not be helped openly. He would be helped invisibly. And the way it would happen, I would come to learn, was a thing more delicate than I had ever imagined. The older guard moved. 2 paces forward, halt, about turn, 2 paces back, halt, about turn. A drill so simple a child could do it, except it wasn't simple. It was timed. It was deliberate. It happened, I would swear to you, at the exact second the young man's knees began to soften again. And the young man, because his body had been waiting for it, moved with him. His legs found purchase. His muscles, which had been frozen, were forced to engage. The blood that had been pooling in his calves was driven by the simple mechanics of those few paces back up into his core. His chest expanded. His eyes cleared just a fraction. The crowd thought it was ceremony. The crowd applauded. I knew it wasn't ceremony. It was the second part of the technique. The first part is the call, the voice that snaps a falling soldier back into form. The second part is the movement that follows, the one disguised as ritual, the one that buys him another 5 minutes. 5 minutes to recover. 5 minutes to get blood and air and dignity back into his body before the formal changeover begins and his comrades march in to relieve him. I looked at my phone. I'd been filming without even realizing it. The video was 47 seconds long. I would watch that video later more times than I'd like to admit. I would slow it down. I would zoom in. I would look for the exact moment the older guard knew, and I would never quite find it, because by the time you can see it in the footage, he's already done it. The decision happens before the body moves, before the breath is drawn. He just knows, the way mothers know when their bobbies are about to wake. Had he pulled my arm, Uncle Marcus looked at his hands. Whose hands? The other one, the one helping him. I followed her gaze. The older guard's hands were on his own rifle exactly where they should be. But there was something Hattie had picked up that I had missed. His thumb. His right thumb was moving. Slow, regular, almost imperceptible, tapping out a rhythm against the wooden stock. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. I watched it for a few seconds. Then I looked back at the young guard. And his chest, his slow recovering chest, was rising and falling in exactly the same rhythm. He was being given a pace to breathe to. I'm not embarrassed to tell you my eyes filled. I'm a grown man. I've been to 2 wars as a civilian aid worker before I gave it up. I've seen things you wouldn't want me to describe. But the small humanity of that thumb, that one quiet thumb tapping out a beat for a younger man to find his way back to himself, that was something I wasn't prepared for. That was something that bypassed everything I knew about how strangers behave to one another and reminded me of how soldiers behave to one another. How brothers behave to one another. How men who have stood in lines together, in cold and heat and fear, behave to one another when no one is supposed to be looking. A man in front of me, German by his accent, was explaining to his teenage son what he thought was happening. It is the heat, he said. He is a young one. It is his first summer, perhaps. The training is very hard, but you see, they do not fall. They never fall. They are like, how do you say, like statues. His son was nodding, but his son was also looking at me because I think he could see I was struggling, and he was the kind of boy who notices things. I gave him a small smile. He gave one back. That was all. Then something happened that none of us expected. A woman pushed through the crowd. She was small, maybe 60, in a yellow cardigan and white trousers. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder with a Sainsbury's logo on it. She was moving quickly but not running. Her face was set, the way a woman's face sets when she's made up her mind and is past asking permission. She walked right up to the railings. A few people stepped aside to let her through, thinking she just wanted a better view. The police officer turned his head. His hand moved an inch toward his radio. The older guard's eyes, I am certain of it, ticked toward her without his head moving. She stopped at the railing. She looked at the young guard. He couldn't have seen her, not properly, but she was directly in his line of sight, and I have to think some part of him registered her there. She opened her tote bag. The police officer started moving, not running, but moving with purpose, the kind of walk that becomes a run in 2 more seconds if needed. She took out a small bottle of water, and she held it up. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to give it to him. She didn't reach over the railing. She just held it up where he could see it, as if to say, I see you. I see what's happening. And if you can hang on for 15 more minutes until they come and get you, this will be here. Here is water. Here is somebody who knows. Then she put the bottle on the ground at the base of the railing, stepped back, and folded her hands in front of her. The police officer stopped. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She gave him the smallest nod, the kind older women give when they're telling you, without words, that they know what they're doing and they're not going to be moved. He hesitated. Then he gave the smallest nod back. She didn't leave. She stood there, A small woman in a yellow cardigan, just standing, just being there in case she was needed. And here is where, I think, the day became something other than a day. Because the young guard, who had been swaying invisibly, who had been holding on by his fingernails, who had been counting his own breaths to the older guard's thumb, suddenly had something else to anchor to. He had a witness, a stranger who saw him, a grandmother, maybe, who had decided that this young man, somebody's son, was not going to be allowed to fall while she was standing there. I looked at the older guard. For the first time, his expression changed. It was tiny. It was so small that no camera could have caught it, but the muscle at the corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile. Nothing as obvious as a smile, but an acknowledgement, a flicker. As if he were saying to the woman across all those feet of pavement and railing and ceremony, "Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I see you too." She didn't see it, but she didn't need to. A boy of about 10, 2 rows back, was tugging his mother's sleeve and asking what was going on. The mother was hushing him. The American with the camera had lowered his phone entirely. He was just watching now, the way you watch the end of a film when you've forgotten you're in a cinema. I felt Pauline's hand on my arm. "Marcus," she whispered. "I know. That guard, the young one. I know. He's going to make it." I looked at her. She was crying just a little. Quiet tears, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than the moment. I knew where they came from. Our father had served back in his national service days, decades before any of us were born. He used to tell us when we were small that the worst thing about being a soldier wasn't the danger or the discipline or the cold. It was the loneliness of standing still while the world moves around you. Standing still while people stare at you like you're not a person. Standing still while your body fails you and you're not allowed to admit it. And here in front of us, on a hot Tuesday in London, a young man was standing still and failing, and 3 other people, a senior soldier and a small grandmother and a police officer with a radio, were quietly conspiring to make sure he didn't fail alone. Hattie was watching all of it with an expression I'll never forget. It was the expression of a child who has just understood something about adults that she didn't understand 5 minutes before. That sometimes the most important things we do for each other, we do without speaking. That kindness can look like a drill. That mercy can wear a uniform. The minutes ground on. The older guard's thumb kept tapping. The young guard's chest kept rising and falling. The woman in the yellow cardigan kept standing. The crowd, sensing without understanding, had gone almost reverent. And then in the distance, I heard it. The drums. It was very faint at first. A pattern of beats far down the street where the relief detachment was forming up to march in. The sound the regiment makes when it is coming for its own. Boots on stone, drums on the air, bagpipes maybe that day, I can't remember now. The young guard heard it, I'm sure of that. His chin lifted just a fraction. There was something in his face, a thing I can only call hope. He had heard the sound of help coming. He had heard the regiment. And he was going to make it. That was the moment I thought the story was ending. I thought, well, what a thing. What an extraordinary thing. We'll go home and tell people. They won't believe us. Hattie will remember this for the rest of her life, and so will I. But the story wasn't ending. Because the marching feet weren't even halfway down the road yet. And the young guard, having heard them, having let himself believe for 1 second that he was nearly safe, did the thing you must never do. He let his guard down. Just a hair, just enough. His shoulders, which had been holding him up by pure tension, relaxed by a single degree, and his body, which had been waiting for permission, took it. He started to go. Not the slow tilt of before, a real fall, the kind that has decided, the kind that ends with a boy on his face on the pavement in front of 200 phones. The older guard saw it. The woman in the yellow cardigan saw it. The police officer saw it. And what they did next, between them in the space of perhaps 3 seconds, is the part of this story that nobody believes when I tell it. It's the part I'm going to tell you now. And I want you to understand before I do that I am not making it up. I am not embellishing. I am telling you what I saw, with my niece on my arm and my sister at my shoulder and a cold coffee in my hand, on a Tuesday afternoon in London, in the summer of 2019. What happened next changed the way I think about strangers. It changed the way I think about quiet, ordinary courage. It changed the way I think about what it means to be in a uniform. And I'm going to tell you all of it. 3 seconds. That's all it took. I've thought about those 3 seconds more than I've thought about any 3 seconds of my life. I've replayed them so often they've worn smooth in my memory, the way a stone in a river goes smooth. And every time I replay them, I see something new, a detail I missed, a small movement at the edge of the frame, a breath taken or held. Let me try to give them to you the way I saw them. Second 1. The young guard's knees gave. I mean really gave. There was nothing tentative about it. His body had finished negotiating with itself and had filed its decision. His weight pitched forward. His rifle started to slide. His bearskin dipped. In the corner of my eye I saw 100 phones jerk upward, the way phones do when people sense, with that horrible voyeur's instinct, that something filmable is about to happen. Second 2. The older guard moved. I don't know how to describe what he did. It wasn't in any drill manual. It wasn't ceremony. It wasn't even, strictly speaking, allowed. He took one full stride forward, breaking from his post for the first time in God knows how long, and he did it with such absolute precision that the crowd, even the crowd that knew something was wrong, registered it as part of the performance. His boot came down with that hard regimental crack. His rifle stayed where it was meant to be. His face did not change. But his left arm that should have been pinned to his side, came up. It came up at exactly the angle and exactly the speed of a man bringing his arm to a salute. Anyone filming it would think, later, watching the footage, that they had captured some quirky bit of British ceremony they didn't know about. A salute to nothing. A flourish from another century. It wasn't a salute. It was a brace. His forearm caught the young guard's chest, just under the crossbelt. At the exact moment the young guard's weight went past the point of no return. And he did not push him. He did not shove him upright. That would have been visible. That would have been the end of both their careers. What he did was hold him. For one heartbeat. One single heartbeat of pressure, just enough to redistribute the falling weight back over the young man's feet, just enough to remind that exhausted body which way was up. Then his arm came back down to his side, exactly the way an arm comes down from a salute, and he took one step back to his post. The young guard was standing. I cannot tell you how he was standing. I cannot give you the physics of it. By every law I know about bodies and gravity and unconsciousness, that young man should have been face down on the pavement. Instead, he was upright, swaying but upright, and the color was coming back into his face in patches. Second 3. The woman in the yellow cardigan stepped forward. She had been standing very still. Now she moved, not toward the railing but slightly to the side into the line of sight of one of the tourists who had been filming. She positioned herself, with what I am certain was complete intention, directly between his lens and the young guard. She wasn't large. She didn't entirely block the shot, but she shifted the frame. She put her yellow cardigan in the way of the worst angle. And she did it as if she were just adjusting her bag, just looking for something in her tote, just an old woman fussing. The tourist swore softly and moved his phone. By the time he found a new angle, the older guard was back at his post. The young guard was standing, and the moment had passed. I don't know if she knew exactly what she was doing. I think she did. I think she understood, in the deep way some people understand without ever having been told, that what she had just witnessed was something that did not belong on the internet. That a young man's worst moment was not a thing for strangers in other countries to laugh at over breakfast. That dignity, especially the borrowed dignity a uniform gives you, is a fragile thing and ours to protect. The police officer was already moving. Not running, walking, with purpose. He was speaking into his radio as he came, quiet and steady, his eyes never quite leaving the young guard. And behind him, just visible at the end of the street, the relief detachment was rounding the corner. Red coats, tall hats, the slow, steady tread of the regiment coming for its own. What happened next was the formal part, the visible part, the part that anyone who was there could describe. The detachment marched in. The senior NCO called the commands. The young guard, drawing on God knows what last reserve, performed his half of the changeover correctly. Not perfectly. His turn was a fraction late. His rifle dipped a fraction lower than it should have. But he did it. He completed his duty. He was relieved by his replacement with full ceremony in front of 200 phones, and he marched off with the rest of the detachment, his bearskin high, his boots in time, his face revealing nothing. To anyone watching the official ceremony, he was just another guardsman finishing his shift. But I knew, Hattie knew, Pauline knew, the woman in the yellow cardigan knew, the police officer knew, and the older guard, the one who had brought his arm up at exactly the right second, the one who had tapped out a breathing rhythm with his thumb, the one who had broken every visible rule of his post to keep a younger man on his feet, he knew most of all. As the detachment marched away, the older guard was at the back of the formation. His eyes, for one moment, swept across the crowd. They passed over me without seeing me. They passed over Pauline. Then they found the woman in the yellow cardigan. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He didn't, in any way that a camera could have caught, acknowledge her at all. But his eyes held hers for half a second longer than they held anyone else's. And she, the small grandmother with her Sainsbury's tote bag, lifted her chin a fraction, just enough. That was the whole exchange. That was the whole receipt. Thank you, you're welcome. The kind of conversation that takes a lifetime to learn how to have. Then they were gone, boots receding, drums fatting. The crowd, released, exhaled together. People started to clap because in the absence of any other instructions, that's what people do at the end of a ceremony. They clap. They take a last photo. They turn to their partners and say, well, that was nice, wasn't it, and start looking for somewhere to eat. We stood there for a long time, the three of us. The woman in the yellow cardigan picked up her water bottle from where she'd placed it at the railing. She tucked it back into her tote bag. She turned. She caught my eye. I don't know what was on my face, something obvious probably. She gave me a small, dry smile, the smile of a person who had done what needed doing and was now going home to put the kettle on. He'll be all right, she said, like she was answering a question I hadn't asked. You saw, I said, it wasn't a question. I saw, she said. How did you know? She thought about it for a second. Then she said, my husband stood out here for 9 years. I know what it looks like when one of them is going. I didn't have anything to say to that. I just nodded. She nodded back, and then she walked away into the crowd into the rest of her Tuesday, and I never saw her again. I don't know her name. I don't know where she lives. I don't know if her husband is still alive. I hope, for what it's worth, that he is, and that she told him about that afternoon, and that they laughed about it together over their tea. The police officer was speaking to a colleague who'd come up to him. He glanced at me once. I think he was working out whether I was about to be a problem. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. He gave me one back. That was that. We walked back through St. James's Park. The pelicans had moved. A wedding party was taking photos by the lake. Hattie was quiet for a long time. Then, halfway across the bridge, she said, Uncle Marcus. Yes, love. Why didn't anyone say anything? About what? About what happened to the guard. I thought about it for a while. The water was very still that afternoon. A duck slid out from under the bridge, leaving a long V behind it. Because some things, I said, aren't for saying. She frowned, but you're saying them to me. I am. So they are for saying. I laughed. She had me. She always had me. Some things, I corrected. You have to be careful about who you say them to." She thought about that. Then she nodded in her serious 12-year-old way, as if I had just told her something she would file away and pull out years later when she needed it. We walked the rest of the way in silence. That night in our little hotel near Victoria, Pauline went out to find food and Hattie sat on the edge of her bed and asked me to tell her in my own words what I thought had really happened. Not what we'd seen, what it meant. I tried as best I could. I told her about the technique I'd never had a name for, the one the regiments use, the one that turns a fall into a stand. I told her about the older man's thumb. I told her about the woman in the yellow cardigan. I told her that there are things people do for each other when they think nobody's looking, that are the closest thing I know to a kind of grace. She listened the way only children listen, with her whole face, and then she said, in a voice so small I almost didn't catch it, "I want to be like the lady." I asked her what she meant. "I want to be the one who stands there," she said. "If somebody's falling, I want to be the one who notices." I didn't trust myself to answer her. I just put my hand on the back of her head, the way you do with a child you love so much it hurts. And we sat there for a long time, not saying anything, in a small London hotel room with the sound of taxis on the street below. That was 7 years ago. Hattie is 19 now. She's studying nursing at a university up north. She still has the little book her granddad gave her, the one with the red coats and the tall black hats. It's on her shelf next to her textbooks. She told me last Christmas that she keeps it there to remind her of two things, the guards and the lady. I don't know what happened to that young guardsman. I never learned his name. I have no way of finding out who he was, and even if I could, I'm not sure I'd want to. I think there's a kindness in not knowing. I think his moment on that pavement belongs to him, and to the older soldier who held him up, and to the small woman in the yellow cardigan, and to the rest of us only as something we happen to witness. People sometimes ask me when they hear bits and pieces of this story whether I think the technique was real, the thing the regiment does, the feint to attention, whether it's a real thing or just something I imagined. I tell them the same thing every time. It's real, I saw it. I cannot prove it to you and I am not going to try, but it's real. And it isn't, in the end, what I think about most when I think about that day. What I think about most is the woman. Because the older guard, brave and disciplined as he was doing his duty. He had trained for years to be able to do what he did. His mercy was a professional mercy, a regimental mercy. Beautiful, yes, and quietly heroic, but built into the bones of who he was. The woman owed that young man nothing. She wasn't paid to be there. She wasn't in uniform. She had no orders. She was just a person walking past on a hot afternoon with bread and milk in her bag, and she saw a stranger in trouble and she stopped and she stood, and she didn't move until she was sure he was safe. That's the kind of person I want to be. That's the kind of person I want Hattie to be. That's the kind of person I think we all secretly want to be when we let ourselves admit it. There are techniques nobody outside the regiment understands. There are drills and codes and silent signals passed between men in red coats. There is a whole inheritance of small kindnesses, soldier to soldier, that the public will never see and was never meant to. But there is also, walking among us, the woman in the yellow cardigan. And as long as she keeps walking among us, stopping when she sees a young man begin to fall, I think we're going to be all right. I really do. I think we're going to be all right.